Welcome to richplanet.net, a program which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's hour-long special program follows the amazing story of Robert Hall and the Gateshead Grey. My involvement with this incredible story started in September 2008, when I was holding a presentation at Cademan Hall about aliens and UFOs. I placed an article in the local free paper to advertise this talk, which included the Rich Planet phone number. One evening, about a week before the presentation, I received a call from a Geordie gentleman. He asked me if I was the one giving the talk. He then said, "Well, I've seen them," and over the next half hour proceeded to tell me the most fascinating story about a UFO and alien visitation. Robert Hall was just 5 years old when the events took place, and he described how a UFO appeared behind an invisible barrier in his street. He and another boy were abducted, taken on board the craft, and examined by horrible creatures. His uncle Ernie, a coal merchant, lived in the next street, and also witnessed one of the creatures. The events he described took place just a few miles away from the iconic Gateshead Angel, 58 years before the Angel was constructed. The year was 1940, and Britain was in the midst of the Second World War. Robert Hall lived in Bensham, an area of Gateshead filled with terraced houses driven by coal fires, a stone's throw away from the banks of the River Tyne. I was stunned by this story, and asked Robert if I could conduct a recorded interview over the telephone the following day. He seemed keen to do this. When I phoned him the next day, his attitude had changed, and he said that he no longer wanted to talk about the story because he had been ridiculed all of his life, and that this would just create more attention. Unperturbed by this, I read over the notes I had made during the conversation, and I noticed he had mentioned a few names of researchers that he had given his story to in the past. The first was David Boyle, who runs a very interesting UFO and paranormal attraction in Blackpool. I telephoned David, and he told me that he believed the core of Robert Hall's story to be true. I also contacted Gary Heseltine, who is a detective constable and writes for a UFO magazine. Some time ago he wrote a detailed account of Robert's story, so I arranged a telephone interview with Gary to find out a bit more about this mysterious case.
Yes, I'm a police officer with the British Transport Police, and I've been a serving officer for over 19 years. I'm now into my 20th year, and I've been a detective constable for the last 14 years. Robert Hall rang me up out of the blue one night in, I think it would probably be early 2003. My first 10 or 15 minutes, I'm thinking, yeah, I've got a nutter on the line here. That was my genuine thought. I thought, I've got somebody who's just rambling on, and but I wouldn't be rude and let him talk. And then it struck me that every time I asked him anything, he came back with what I thought was a lot of information. Mm-hmm. And he was mentioning street names and churches and scientists and whatever. I'm thinking, this is one hell of a story. And the more I asked him, and I think I must have talked to him for about 2 hours that first night, the more my opinion changed, that as bizarre as the whole story sounded, he appeared to have too much information, and with me working with suspects and witnesses, he appeared to be showing me signs of genuine recall. It didn't sound like a fabricated story, as crazy as it sounded. So I remember putting the phone down after the conversation and going through to my then partner and said, I've just spoke to a guy for 2 hours, and it's the most bizarre story I've ever heard in my life, and if it's true, it's the most fantastic UFO story I've ever heard. And that made me want to go meet him. Mm-hmm. So as soon as I was able, I went to go see him, and the man was just, like he was on the phone, and I said, look, all right, I've come up here, I want you to take me around all these places that you told me. If I think you're lying, and I'll question you and whatever. And he took me around, and the more questions I asked, he just came back with detail upon detail, and I couldn't help but feel at the end that, as fantastic as it was, there was some kind of truthful element to it. But obviously it would be very, very hard to prove. Obviously he told me about his Uncle Ernie Rain. I went to go see him, but unfortunately, whilst he was there in body, his mind was all over the place, and he was suffering with senile dementia. So literally anything he said wouldn't have counted for anything, because it wouldn't have held water, in the sense of that, you could probably get the guy to say anything. So it wouldn't amount to anything. But I took a photograph of him, and then I spoke on the phone with his sister Rhoda, who was at the was and is 2 years older, and where he was 5, she was, I think, 7. Might have been 9, I might be wrong, but she was certainly a few years older, and she said, without being prompted, I can remember that there were scientists at the door for days after this all happened, and that she was there when this reporter came from the Chronicle, and who grabbed Robert when he wouldn't give him his story, and sort of threatened him. And so it was without prompting, it wasn't leading her. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. Something certainly must have happened. When he said, well, it's from Mulholland, the tables were outside on Saltwell Road, from Mulholland Shop to Trescothick Street, that's just too much detail for a little kid to come out with if it hasn't happened. People don't mention so much detail when they're fabricating a lie. And so, I, for one, think that at the heart of this is a very weird story. That's why, if you read that article again, I actually say, look, I'm putting this out because I'm tied up. I'm looking for people to help me on this, to take it forward, and perhaps you're the man. So, I just think it's a fantastic story, and if we could ever get some kind of proper confirmation of essentially elements of the story in a newspaper, I think it would be a bit like discovering Roswell.
With the word Roswell ringing in my head, I now felt compelled to get to the bottom of this story. The events took place in 1940s Bensham, which is just a few miles from where I live, so I was ideally placed to get regular access to libraries and witnesses. However, I needed the cooperation of Robert Hall if I was going to get anywhere, so I decided to invite him and his wife to the Alien and UFO presentation at Gateshead Library. I sent him 2 free tickets in the hope that he would show up. To my delight, he arrived 5 minutes before the talk, and I shook his hand and he gave me a copy of the article written by Gary Heseltine. During the Alien presentation, he sat near the front, and I was aware of his presence. Several times I could hear him making noises of confirmation towards the facts given in my presentation. After the event, I arranged to telephone him the following day. To my total dismay, he went cold on me again. He explained that he was wary of people who wanted to profit from his story, and this seemed like his final word. A few weeks went by, and I couldn't get the story out of my head, so I decided to put my video camera in the boot of the car and go around and knock on his door. To my amazement, he looked very pleased to see us, and explained that he had suffered a few personal problems, and that he was now happy to do a televised interview. Robert Hall was no ordinary 5-year-old boy. Having spoken to him at length, on several occasions, both in person and on the phone, I now have a feel for his character. He is certainly a maverick, and as a child was often left to his own devices. He was happy to get on a tram by himself and travel to Newcastle, or even as far as Sunnyside, which is 5 miles away. A very adventurous and curious boy, with little interest in going to school. He wasn't afraid to break the rules, but would do anything to help anyone. Robert lived on the End Terrace at 29 Headley Street with his mother and father, older sisters Rhoda and Cynthia, and his brother Harry was on the front line. At the side of the house is a back lane, known by locals as the Bottom Back Lane, which runs parallel to the railway line and adjoins all of the adjacent streets. This lane was like a playground for all of the children who lived in these terraces. I started by asking Robert about his early life as a 5-year-old boy in Bensham in 1940.
I never used to bother with school if I could help it. My mother was working on the railway as a cleaner. My father was in the coke ovens, working at the trade and estate coke ovens. My brother was in the front line, Harry. He was fighting with the Germans, you know. And I was nobody, I used to sit in the street. Well, I was put it this way, I was pushed out into the street when I was about 4. Right, but I was brilliant. If you know what I mean. Used to get all over.
Did you play football on the streets?
Oh, no, I didn't like football. We used to yodel. No, you know, you've heard some people used to yodel, right? And if a friend come along the top of the street, he would yodel, and you would know where they were, you know. You know what I mean, with your throat, we used to yodel. We used to go to well, you couldn't get in the cinema till you were 8-year-old. So you used to give somebody maybe your money and they would take you in, making you were their son, you know, taking the pictures. We're watching a whole lot of soldiers marching along Southwell Road. After about 3 hours, we got sick of it. There was too many, it kept going on, we're getting colder, wanted something to eat. So we lived in Headley Street, you see, so we're both run down to go around the back lane to our houses. You know when you look through a fire and it's wobbly? Well, that seemed to be the barrier. All you could see is the railway because we didn't see it till we got through this like a barrier. And we're under these horrible creatures. No, they seemed to be pleased because they had put something at each side of the wall, and if you were too tall, it affected you or something. We had seemed to be getting under some kind of barrier, and they got a hold of it. And when they were
Hold of this other lad as well.
yeah, and they took we both along, and the horrible looking things. There was about 18 and 19 creatures, the horrible looking things.
Can you describe what they look like?
Well, there was one. I know you're gonna take the mick. One was like Bigfoot. He was very tall, and the others were small, about 4 foot. And they were horrible ones. One had like a diver's mask on him, and one of the creatures was very good looking bloke, one of the aliens, and he had a kind of like a robe on.
Did he have, what colour hair did he have?
He was blonde.
And what colour eyes?
Didn't notice.
Was he tall or small?
He was tall, but he liked me because I was blonde. God.
Right.
I wanted to be a wheelie.
Right.
But
And was he kind of like human in appearance?
definitely,
Right.
yeah, you could pass him on the street, you wouldn't even know. But he had long hair, like ye. Well, a bit longer than yours. And I says, well, you can examine me. And I went in the capsule. No, they'd pulled the wall.
Was that a UFO?
Yeah, but it moved all of a sudden. It was at the bottom of the street. And they took it from there and they put it into the back yard. Now, the walls had been pulled down, ready for air raid shelters in the backyards. So it was in there. We walked through, he took me through into there, examined this, took some blood out of the back of my neck. He said, if you lift your head up, you'll be killed instantly. And I was petrified, or nay, pay myself. They examined me, they brought us out, and they were pleased as punch with me. But I was really bad, I tell you, shaking. And I stood beside these other creatures. They were like men, but the tallest one was about 4 foot. And they went down to about 2 foot. There was 3 of them. And these other ones, they were all horrible looking creatures. No,
And this was on board the craft?
outside the craft.
Outside the craft?
Yeah, and this was in the back lane.
Right.
But you see, with them, about 18 of them, they were right along the lane, right around we. We couldn't run that way, couldn't run any way.
And apart from the boy that you mentioned, was there any other children or any...
Yeah, they were trying to... The girls went into hysterics. They were, what do you call hysteria? They were trying to get over the fences, to get over the railway to get away. But before that, a big black dog come in, and it was really wild, and it was going for the kids. And this little man, like a little short man, and that's just queer. And I grabbed the thing off his belt, and I pointed at the dog, and the dog went docile, just like it was drugged, right? And that's what he had been using on the kids when they got violent or frightened. And they were pleased as punch with that with me. The big tall one was like, I know you're going to say it daft, but it was like Bigfoot. He got ahead of the other lad. He says, run, run. And I run up the back lane, straight up the street to Mona Holland's paper shop. And but I was kind of like the clappers and I was hardly moving. But I got up the top of the back lane, anyway, this street, and I says, the soldier says, some horrible creatures doing the lane. Oh, he says, it's children having a game, man. I says, look at the marks on my face, man. I says, it isn't. Of course, the soldier officer says, come on, there's a pistol. Go around the corner. Made me still look big. He come around the corner. When he seen what went on, he fired a pistol. All hell broke loose on Southwell Road. The men were running all over the place, you know.
So the actual craft itself that you saw?
It went up a height after that. But what I couldn't figure out for years where all them creatures went. They couldn't have gotten in the small craft.
How big was the craft?
It was only about 14 feet or 12 to 14 feet, you know.
What shape was it?
Well, not dead round. It was more of egg shape, you know.
Did you see it disappear?
Well, we did see the top of the street when I was at the top of the street. There must have been hundreds seen it. No.
After Robert Hall's UFO sighting and abduction, he told his parents about the creatures, but they did not believe him. And he was told to keep quiet about it. This is by no means the end of this incredible story. About 3 days later, things took an even more bizarre twist. In the morning, Robert was going to the local shop for his father's newspaper.
Then I went to this shop, Mona Holland's, to get my father's paper. A grey come after us up the back lane. I run like out. Grey was on us like a shot, and I was a hell of a good runner. And as I screamed, my uncle Ernie smashed its head in with a shovel. And he says, come, I've never seen it out like it. And he says, get Sergeant Brooks on Southwell Road. He'd be just coming off duty now. So I run to Southwell Road and Sergeant Brooks come along. I says, he's killed it. He says, killed what? And he went for his truncheon and had the old-fashioned police mark on, and he come around the corner. He said, by God, and he was crossing his and praying. He says, I've never seen it out like it. They put it on a coal sack and pulled it into the backyard, into the coal place is still there to this day. They pulled it into there. You see, you get yourself away home. I says, no, I've been telling you the damn truth. There is your proof. Get yourself away home, Robert. I says, no, I'm standing here.
Absolutely incredible. Robert's uncle Ernie Wren had killed the creature with a coal shovel. This is the precise spot where the alien was hit over the head with the shovel. About 20 minutes later, according to Robert, a vehicle took the dead creature's body to a place where it could be hidden until authorities were informed. According to him, the hiding place was underneath St. Cuthbert's Church on Bensham Road, about half a mile from the incident. He said there were some steps at the back of the church which led underneath, down which the alien was taken and then stored for 3 months.
They took it to the church on Bensham Road. Then the next day, there was men in white overalls, army, I didn't know what they were, and with like suitcases, and they pulled everybody out of the houses right along Southwell Road. 2 men on one side of the street, 2 men on the other, and they were going into everybody's house. Old grannies were getting pulled out of the house, and they were looking for them in the houses, because it was about 3 or 4 days after the UFO went away that one come after me. So they thought there was maybe more, and they were checking every house looking for greys or whatever they could find. Professors was getting scientists from Edinburgh, investigators from London,
Your house.
into my house. My father got sick of it.
To investigate Robert's claims, I went along to the church which still stands at the top of Bensham Bank. When I got there, it was clear that the church is no longer in use. All of the doors and windows were boarded up, and it seemed to be in a state of disrepair. A notice on the side of the building stated that the church had been purchased and was to be converted into a museum. I went round to the back of the church to see if I could find the steps. I'm just standing now at the top of the steps by the side of the church where the alien was taken. I'm just going to go down the steps. You see, it's not very pleasant down here. steps are very narrow. Okay. And there is a chamber. Smells not too good either. There's a chamber underneath here somewhere. Hello? Wow, it's a little chamber which is about, I'd say about 12 feet by 8 feet. And we're underneath the floor of the church here. If you can see this. It's right beneath the church. An ideal place to store a dead alien. A chilling thought went through my head as I sat in the crypt. Imagine all of the church services which must have taken place during the time the alien was stored underneath.
And how they're doing it at the back of the church.
That's where the very narrow steps are.
Yeah.
So can you describe that entrance to the...
I wouldn't go and do it. Not likely.
The interview with Robert Hall went on for an hour, and several other interesting details came out. On the morning he was watching the soldiers, some time before he was captured by the aliens, he remembers an extremely bright light zigzagging across the sky, which was also spotted by some Australian soldiers. After it went out of sight, they didn't pay much attention to it. Robert also remembered a woman holding a baby coming out of the craft shortly after he had been let out. Robert was ill for a few days following the abduction. For 2 days his eyes watered and he suffered headaches. A small triangular-shaped mark appeared on his left cheek, which remained until he was about 13. After the events, Robert was intimidated and threatened by officials who he presumed were from the army or the government, who said that he would be killed if he said anything. A high-ranking man from the Air Force interviewed him and asked him to provide an account of what he saw. He remembers the Air Force official was called Marshall. He handed Robert a child's spinning top and asked him if this is what the craft looked like. At some point, Robert was visited by a reporter from the Evening Chronicle, but he would not say anything. The reporter punched him to try and get the information, and this has been corroborated by his sister Rhoda. For years after the events, Robert remembers being followed to school every day by a man. He even claims that his UFO experience is recorded in his school record. There was clearly a lot to investigate here. Before I started tracing other witnesses, I decided to email Daryl Sims, one of the world's leading experts on alien abduction. In reply to my email, he attached a drawing of what he described as the usual suspects in a typical abduction case. This drawing was so similar to Robert Hall's descriptions, I asked Daryl if he would do an interview over the phone. Daryl Sims has been investigating the alien abduction phenomena for over 30 years and has studied over 1,000 cases worldwide. Daryl agreed to a telephone interview to try and shed some light on Robert Hall's story. Basically, this gentleman contacted me a few months ago and I've interviewed him. You've seen a little bit of a little clip of the interview. If I just basically describe how he describes his abductors, then perhaps you can maybe shed a little bit of light on what I'm saying. He described one of them as being very tall with long blonde hair. Another one he described as being like Bigfoot. He described the others as all being horrible looking creatures ranging from 4 foot down to 2 foot. And one had what looked like an old-fashioned diver's mask on, like the big spherical diver's mask, and he claims that it had, or may have had liquid in it. I just wondered if any of this is common, or if you could shed any light on any of it, just down to your knowledge and experience of abductees.
The entities that are, first of all, that are found for your audience's interest, the entities that are often described in these events range from a small little gray type creature with large bug eyes that are usually almond-shaped, sometimes perfectly round, to another creature that's a little bit larger than he is, which is often referred to as the Doctor. And then there's a praying mantis type creature that's about 5.5 to 6 to 7 foot tall. There's a humanoid creature, which we're going to mention and speak about here in a moment. And then there's another creature that looks, for all intents and purposes, for those of you that are in the movie, watch movies a lot, in Star Wars, there was a movie called a creature called a Wookiee, and it kind of looks like a giant Bigfoot is what it looks like. And some people describe those creatures as well. The humanoid creature that you see on the quote-unquote UFO events or abduction scenarios, or contact scenarios, is a human-like creature. In our estimation, the human-like creatures they're not human. Is the best way to describe them. They're human-like, and there is some who are of the opinion, and I'm one of them, Dr. Jacobs at Temple University and Bud Hopkins and myself are three that think that these human entities are in fact nothing but a version of the alien in a hybridized form.
Okay. That
the purpose, his purpose here may be to comfort a human by calming him down, as an example, when the little entities are going to do whatever they're going to do to you. Sometimes he will come in. The best example I can give of this was the famous Travis Walton case. My friend Travis found himself on a craft and was more than mortified when he saw these little creatures coming toward him. And he picked up something, and he said, I don't know what it was. It kind of looked like a big wrench. And he said, I was going to hit him with it, stop them from coming after me. And he said, at that point, he said, instantly, this large human, very well built, very tall, came in, and all the conversations took place there were mental. And these entities, no one knows the real answer to this. I've got some ideas, but basically, they prefer you not to speak on the craft. Almost never will you hear speaking. Now, you'll hear screaming by the abductee in some cases, but you are not allowed to speak. They don't want you to do that. And anyway, the human seems to be a hybridization. And one might ask the question, well, why in the world would you say something like that? Because what does to what end? Well, one of the ends is the fact that they may be useful, not just on the craft, but they may be useful down here. In other words, if they wanted to, say, cause a reconnaissance down here among the humans without being detected, it would be far easier to do it in a human form than it would be with a little bug-eyed guy wandering around here. You'd need about a 50-pound fly swatter to get that guy. So it's going to be far easier to use a humanoid form to be undetectable for the most part. Unless you really knew what you're looking for, you would not detect this guy.
One thing to point out here, that this event took place in 1940. Now, I know that the Roswell incident was 47 and there was the Missouri incident in 1941. So do you have cases from as long ago as that? We have cases. My own abduction case started when I was 3.5 years old in 1952. There weren't any monster movies and or anything like that back then. You know, when my parents would certainly never let me watch something like that as a 3.5-year-old child. And my events are conscious. I've never had hypnosis or any memory recovery techniques to, quote-unquote, figure out what happened. I know what happened, and I was cognizant, and I saw the entities there. And the answer to your question, do we have cases go back further than that? The answer is yes. The problem is, how many people do you get to talk to that have cases back in the late 1800s to
to 1900s or even earlier.
Yeah.
Well, generally you don't get to contact those people because they're either A, dead, or B, your information is anecdotal because they're too old. So my question I always ask my abductees, especially the oldest ones, is have you ever talked to any of your parents, aunts, uncles, and relatives about anything that may have happened to them? And some of them say yes, and of course then that puts us way back before the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Hall described a device about the size of a cigarette, which when pointed at an animal or a human, made them become docile. I asked Daryl Sims if he had come across this device in any of his other abduction cases.
I certainly do, and it's an excellent that he brought this up and that you noted it. The object there is, it's usually a laser-like device as far as we are concerned. It's what we would liken it to. It appears to be a laser-like device that fires a small little light beam. Sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's different colors. It doesn't seem to make any difference. Its purpose, it seems to be to neutralize someone should it be necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that we've had an abduction case with an engineer, and this is most interesting because the engineer doesn't believe in abductions, UFOs, flying saucers, period. He doesn't believe in any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But he does believe in what's happened to him, and it's freaking him out. He said, this can't be happening to me. And I said, yeah, I know. I said, how does it feel to be weird like the rest of us? And he laughed and he said, but I'm normal. This can't happen to me. I said,
right.
I know. I said, I understand your problem here, sir. I really do.
Okay. So he had an experience of this kind of instrument.
They couldn't control him. He's very very reactive in the most difficult way. If you try to physically, most people are just scared and don't whatever. He just gets up and tries to fight you. And four of them were four of these little creatures were in the room, and three of them had these little devices like what you described, and they had to use all three of them.
Right.
And those devices almost didn't work. He nearly got them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in fact, he hit one of the entities he reports and knocked it down, and of course that put him out of commission.
Mm-hmm.
But the other three were still using their little laser-like immobilization devices, light taser, whatever you want to call it, to immobilize him, and it finally worked. But he nearly got all four of them.
Right. Another thing that he mentioned, and I think you've given an explanation for this, was that he said that they took blood out of the back of his neck, and they said that he shouldn't lift his head up, otherwise he would be killed instantly. What are your thoughts on that?
I find his statements rather interesting, and here's why. Because first of all, it shows subterfuge. You'll die if you move. Well, we hear this a lot. If you go into any other room than the one we've got you in, you'll die. Mm-hmm. They say weird things like this because they want a complete obedience out of you. Mm-hmm. They want you not to see anything or notice anything. That's hence the reason for you not remembering much of anything. Most people will not remember much unless something triggers those events, like they see something, a memory marker, so to speak, and it triggers a memory, and it scares them. They realize they're remembering all kinds of stuff they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is that these are, the best way to describe this for your audience is these are almost like hypnotic commands given to you. Don't move or you'll die.
Yeah.
They'll give all kinds of commands like this in hopes that you will obey them. And, of course, we've got abductees, some of them who simply won't. So I look at this and I wonder if, in fact, they took blood from the back of his neck. Usually it's taken from the bicep or the back of the leg or some more conspicuous place where you would take, where you would find a vein. There aren't very many large veins in the back of your neck, so to speak, where you would take any medical person would not be taking blood from the back of your neck.
Yes.
Now, somebody might be doing something with your spine or something like that, but by and large, it doesn't make any sense. And you'll find that many of these so-called medical procedures, when looked at through the medical eyes, such as our medical team or cardiovascular surgeon and other people, they don't make sense at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, so it seems, again, it's a ruse. Something else is going on. Mm-hmm. So what could possibly be going on that they weren't taking blood from? Because I mean, if a nurse takes blood from your arm or any other place, they don't tell you you're going to die because they, don't move because you'll die or whatever.
Yeah.
So could they have been putting something in or removing something?
Yes.
Now that would make a lot more sense to me.
Mhm.
Now I don't know if that's what happened, but that makes more sense because you would want the person to be still while you were installing something or removing something.
Mm.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
One thing that Robert Hall claims the aliens asked him was they said that they were looking for relatives of Moses, and they referred to him as the son of Adam. And another thing they asked him was, he said that they asked him why people were fighting, i.e. the Second World War. They asked him about that. Could you shed any light on any of those things?
Certainly can, and again, my thoughts are based on 38 years of investigations, and I pretty much have heard the whoppers and the real things they seem to be concerned with.
Mm-hmm.
And as an investigator, I have to separate the two. They're looking for the relations of Moses. You'd need to be looking at Hasidic Jews of and so on, in the lineage of Abraham. And trust me, they know where they're at, and they already know the answers to that. I could tell you dozens of funny stories about this sort of thing. The bottom line is that it's highly unlikely they're looking for the relations of Moses.
Yeah.
They might, but I seriously don't think that.
This is all extremely interesting, but does not provide any proof that these events occurred. I talked to Robert's older sister, Rhoda, to ask what she could remember of the events in 1940. She remembered that there was a reporter who came into the house to question Robert, and that when the reporter was there, another man came into the house to try and prevent the reporter getting Robert's story, but she didn't know where the other man was from. She said that Robert had told this story all of his life and it had never changed. She also insisted that he is not the type of person who lies or makes up stories. I started tracking down the people who lived in the streets where the events took place. The electoral roll of 1939 was a good place to start, so I was able to get all of the names of the families that lived in each house. I knocked on many doors, and by questioning residents was able to track down some of the people that lived in the area. Anne Anderson lived on Newton Street in 1940 with her sister Lily and brother John. They had been evacuated at the time, so would not have witnessed the events. We tracked her down, and she was able to give us contact details of several people who were still alive that lived here in 1940. In total, we have spoken to approximately 10 people who lived very near the spot where the UFO craft landed, and none of them remember any of the events. Only one person claimed that something strange or unusual occurred that year. Another person who lived in the area at the time was Ada Woff. Ada Woff's parents ran the local shop, which is right next to the place where the UFO is alleged to have landed. They also owned the coal yard where the alien was dragged. Ada was 7 in 1940, and we managed to catch up with her to ask if she could recall anything strange at the time.
Well, to tell you the truth, we all played in that the bottom back lane, that's called. And we all played in there because you could dance there. You know, you used to sing along and dance there and play all kinds of games in that back lane.
Right. So there would always
and it was blocked off at the end, like, you know, there's no cars could get in off that Lovely Hill Road.
So there was always children right the way along that railway line, the back lane,
Playing.
right the way along to sort of, you know, Trafalgar Street and
Yes.
right the way along. Right. So there would be children playing there. I mean, there isn't now. You know, we've been there down a few times, and it's pretty much deserted.
Well, the children don't play out now.
No.
TV and computers, and that's all they do. You know, I mean, it sounds feasible that he would hit it over the head with his shovel, but I can't understand how it was never talked about in my family's house. I'm sure it wasn't.
And what about the police officer that Robert Hall claimed witnessed the creature, Sergeant Brooks? After quite a bit of research, I was able to find that there was indeed a police officer named Brooks who lived in the area in 1940. This 1927 photograph of Gateshead Police Force includes PC 49, William Brooks. I managed to trace his son, Vernon Brooks, and granddaughter, Verna. We arranged an interview to find out whether they knew anything about the creature. Explain to me, how old were you, Vernon, in 1940, and where did you live?
Oh, no, 1940, well, how old would I be? 13, 14. Wasn't it me about 14, I think? 13, 14? My son 13, 1940. And I was way down in Yorkshire.
Right, so you were evacuated
Yeah.
in 1940, you weren't here. Okay, and what was your grandfather's occupation?
Well, he was a police officer, yeah.
And what was his full name?
William Archibald Brooks.
Okay.
Archibald, not Archibald. Archibald, there was no I in it. And he was very insistent on that.
Right. And what rank was he in 1940?
1940, he would have been acting sergeant.
Okay, so people probably would have referred to him as Sergeant Brooks.
Sergeant Brooks, yes.
Okay. And can you remember where your house was, where you lived, or where your father lived?
Yes.
Yeah.
29 Little Terrace.
Okay.
And the house had the name above the door,
Right.
Brangston House.
And that's a stone's throw from Saltwell Road, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And can you remember where his beat would have been in 1940?
His beat would have been... Actually the Gateshead was divided into different areas, and his beat would have covered Bensham and the Thames
Okay.
district.
And it would have included Saltwell Road then?
It would include all this area.
And had the old-fashioned police mark on, and he come round the corner. He said, by God, and he was crossing his son praying. He says, I've never seen out like it.
Well, I'll ask you the question directly, what I'm getting at. Was he ever known to cross himself? You know when people do this? If he was to see something, did you ever see him do that?
No, he never did that. No.
Okay. Right. And do you think he's the type of person who might have kept things from you, or is he the sort of person who would tell you everything? How would you describe him in terms of letting you know what was going on?
He would tell us what was going on, but if he had been sworn to secrecy, or the Official Secrets Act came into being, then it would be finished.
Right.
He wouldn't
Probably
tell you
what you
anything.
needed to know.
Okay. And you've answered this question before off camera. Did he ever speak about seeing any creature of any kind in 1940?
No,
No. And can you remember anyone else ever speaking of that?
never.
Never. Okay. Something that Robert mentioned in his interview was that he had telephoned a local late-night talk show several years ago, the Alan Robson's Night Owls programme, and given his account on air. I decided to telephone the show and ask if it was true that people had in fact confirmed the story. Alan Robson did confirm that people rang in and confirmed things that Robert Hall had said. We wrote to Metro Radio to ask if there was any archive material of the callers who rang in at the time. Unfortunately, these recordings no longer exist. Alan Robson did write to us, however, and in his letter he states, I can confirm that at the time numerous callers did remember the incidents in 1940 and reading about them in local newspapers. So there is some evidence in what is said in this letter, but it is not really enough to turn the event into the next Roswell. We needed more evidence, and the trail of finding witnesses seemed to have dried up. So I decided to focus all of the attention on the newspaper records. According to Robert Hall, a reporter from the Evening Chronicle came to his house and actually assaulted him to try to get the story. To this day, I have so far searched every edition of the Journal and Evening Chronicle from January to July 1940 and have not found any article which corroborates Robert's story. From the evidence and witnesses that I have been able to find, I do not consider this story to be fully corroborated. However, I do believe that Robert Hall is telling the truth. Any supporting evidence which comes to light in the coming months and years will be posted on the richplanet.net website. One final point. The reason why Robert Hall contacted Gary Heseltine in the first place was to complain about a report examining the origins of the phrase little green men. Robert claims that this phrase originated in his street in 1940 after the events. At the time, he described the creatures to others as little grey men, but he was misheard, and the phrase little green men was born and spread around the world.
No, I didn't have the aliens or old Nick. I mean, the devil's mob, you know what I mean? But I had people from Christian churches, you know, didn't say, I got to Chowdene Chapel now and then, I'm going this Sunday. And the older ones in the 90s say, don't do nothing, don't say nothing to nobody. They knew about it, and they wanted to keep it quiet. Well, I thought the truth should come out. You know what I mean? But there you are, but...
And if you were to encounter one again today, would you be really scared, or would you?
No, I wouldn't be frightened. They're more frightened of us than we are of them. That's why they use a thing like a, it's like a, it's like a, something like that. And they point it at you and you go docile. It's just like that, it's something like that, they point at you and you go docile. Well, that's what anger is. You see, if anybody says they believe in little green men, they're not damn green. There wasn't one green among the lot of them. It was grey, and it took all these years, they took them mick, saying they were green. They weren't. They were grey with big eyes. Scared the hell out of us.